He stuttered when he spoke. That was enough for some customers to laugh, enough for a woman to humiliate him in front of a crowd. Jonah didn't fight back. He just kept bagging groceries, hands trembling. But then a little boy stepped forward, just 7 years old, and he changed everything. What started as one act of kindness in a grocery store turned into a national movement of empathy, voice, and courage. And it all began with the words, "He talks like me." You won't forget this story. The grocery store was never quiet, not truly. Even during the earliest hours of the morning, when the aisles stood freshly mopped and the fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead, there was always noise, cartwheels clicking against the tile, the murmur of restockers chatting in the back, the distant beeping of scanners at register lanes. It was a kind of music, familiar and constant, the low hum of a town waking up in pieces. And in the middle of it all stood Jonah. He worked lane 6 every morning shift from Monday to Friday, brown vest with a name tag that read simply, Jonah. Smiles are free. The smile was real. A little hesitant, a little crooked, but warm. He greeted every customer with it, even if they didn't always return the kindness. His posture was always upright, his hands precise, his scanning method quietly rhythmic. But what people noticed most about Jonah, when they noticed him at all, was the stutter. It wasn't loud. It didn't stumble across every word, but it lingered in the consonants, hesitated before the vowels, caught like gravel in his throat when he was nervous. And some customers, though they would never say so out loud, treated his words like a delay, like static, like something they had to wait through. "Paper or plastic?" he'd ask, offering the bags with both hands. Some smiled, some looked down, some didn't answer at all. He'd nod politely either way. Try again if he needed to. Pack the groceries carefully, double-bag the milk, always made sure the eggs were on top, and when each transaction ended, he'd offer that same quiet phrase, voice soft but certain, "Thank you for shopping with us." He didn't expect applause, but sometimes the silence after was louder than anything he could have said. Jonah had been working at Meadow Ridge Grocery for nearly 2 years. He'd started after high school, part-time at first, then moved to full-time when his mother's arthritis made it harder for her to work at the daycare center. He liked the routine, the simplicity of it, the way his day had a shape he could count on. But he also knew he wasn't invisible. Not really. He was just easy to overlook. People remembered the bakery girl with the dyed blue hair. They remembered the manager with the booming laugh and suspenders. They remembered the stock boy who flirted shamelessly with customers in the cereal aisle. But Jonah? Jonah was the pause in the sentence, the moment people glanced away, until the day someone didn't. It was a Thursday, late afternoon, the rush before dinner. A line had formed at his register, 3, 4, 5 deep. A woman in yoga pants glanced at her phone impatiently. A man in a suit tapped his card against the machine before Jonah had even finished scanning. And then came the woman with the heavy earrings. She was mid-60s, expensive perfume, a cart full of pre-cut vegetables, and organic dog food. Jonah greeted her with a quiet, "Hi, how are you today?" She blinked, then sighed. "Oh dear," she said loudly, loud enough for people 2 registers over to hear. "Are they really letting just anyone work the registers now?" Jonah froze. The bagger beside him, a teen named Corey, looked up sharply. "I mean," the woman continued, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "this is a business, isn't it? People don't have time to wait for someone to get the words out. What if I had somewhere to be?" The line behind her shifted. No one said anything, not yet. Jonah's hands shook slightly as he reached for the barcodes. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize maybe, though he wasn't sure why, but the words tangled in his throat like wires. The total is—" "Spit it out," she snapped. And that's when the voice came. Soft, high-pitched, steady. "You don't get to talk to him like that. It came from the end of the line. A little boy, no older than 7, wearing a red raincoat and holding a stuffed dinosaur by the tail. His mother was frozen beside him, eyes wide, her hand still on a bag of apples. But the boy took a step forward, chin lifted. "My cousin talks like that sometimes," he said. "He's the smartest person I know. He reads big books and knows all the dinosaurs. And you're being mean." The entire line had gone quiet. The woman with the earrings turned flustered. "Excuse me?" The boy didn't back down. "You're being a bully," he said. "My teacher says when someone makes fun of how someone talks, it's because they don't know how to listen." Jonah's eyes stung, not with shame, with something else, something warmer, something that rose up in his chest like breath after being held too long. Corey let out a quiet, "Whoa." The woman scoffed. "Well, clearly your mother isn't teaching you manners." The boy's mother stepped forward then, gently placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "I'm teaching him kindness," she said, "something he's demonstrating better than most adults right now." The woman huffed, grabbed her bags, and stormed off without another word. The line exhaled. A man at the back clapped softly. A teenage girl whispered, "Finally." Jonah tried to speak, but the words caught again. The boy smiled up at him. "It's okay," he said. "Take your time. I can wait." And somehow that made all the difference. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. People were quieter, nicer. One woman handed Jonah a folded note with a smile. Another offered him a fist bump. But it was the boy's face that stayed with him, calm, unwavering, like truth wrapped in freckles and determination. That night Jonah walked home slower than usual, not because he was tired, because he was thinking about how sometimes it took the smallest voice to make the biggest room listen, and how maybe, just maybe, he wasn't invisible after all. The next morning, Jonah arrived early to Lane 6, just as the first rays of sun stretched across the grocery store parking lot. The lot was still mostly empty, dew clinging to the windshields of the few early bird shoppers and the delivery trucks parked in the loading zone. Inside, the store smelled like fresh bread from the bakery and lemons from the floor cleaner the night crew had used. Jonah liked that smell. It was the scent of preparation, of quiet before the storm. He clocked in, tied his apron, and adjusted his name tag. It was the same routine, but something felt different. Corey spotted him near the break room and grinned. "Dude, you're famous." Jonah blinked, confused. Corey held up his phone, already open to a local community group on social media. "Look, someone posted about what happened yesterday. That little kid? His mom must have shared it. It's got like thousands of shares." Jonah leaned in. There it was, a photo someone had snapped, not of the confrontation, but of the boy in the red raincoat standing in front of Jonah's register, clutching his stuffed dinosaur like a shield. The caption read, "To the brave little boy at Meadow Ridge Grocery who stood up for a kind, stuttering cashier. Thank you. You reminded us all how to listen with our hearts, not our impatience." Jonah's face flushed. He wasn't used to being noticed. He'd spent most of his life trying to avoid drawing attention to himself. But now people were seeing him. And more importantly, seeing that little boy whose voice had cut through a silence too many adults had been afraid to break. Throughout the morning, customers came through his line with more patience, more eye contact, more kindness. An elderly man with a cane smiled as Jonah rang up his canned soup and said, "You're doing just fine, son." A woman with 2 toddlers in tow leaned across the conveyor belt and added, "My sister stutters. Took her years to find her voice. You've already found yours." Jonah didn't know how to respond. He simply nodded, blinking fast, and whispered his usual, "Thank you for shopping with us." Around midday, the boy returned. Jonah saw the red raincoat first, bouncing down aisle 3, then the dinosaur, then the boy's wide grin. His mother followed behind him, her hair pulled into a loose bun, grocery list in one hand, and a grateful smile on her face. The boy waved as he reached lane 6. "Hi again?" Jonah felt something in his chest loosen. Hi," he managed. "You okay?" the boy asked. Jonah nodded. The mother stepped forward, crouching slightly. "We just wanted to stop by and say thank you, and to make sure you were okay after what happened." Jonah tried to speak, but words failed him again. This time he didn't feel embarrassed. He reached into the drawer beneath the register, pulled out a small sticker, one of the smiley face ones the store gave to kids, and handed it to the boy. The boy took it, beaming. "Thanks." His mother placed a small envelope on the counter. "This is for you, from us." Before Jonah could refuse, she was guiding her son away. He waited until they left before opening it. Inside was a note written in tidy handwriting on a folded piece of stationery. "Dear Jonah, my son's name is Max. He's only 7, but yesterday he taught me more about courage than I could have imagined. And he wouldn't stop talking about you last night. He said you were brave and kind and patient. He said you reminded him of his cousin, who sometimes has trouble speaking, and who sometimes feels like he's not being heard. But yesterday Max saw you standing tall. He saw you keep your cool. He saw you try, and he said, 'I want to be like Jonah when I grow up.' I just want you to know that your presence matters. Your patience matters. Your voice, however it comes out, matters. Thank you for showing my son what strength looks like." There was no signature, just a little drawing at the bottom. A dinosaur wearing a name tag that read, Jonah. Jonah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the breast pocket of his vest, where he kept a small slip of paper with his schedule. For the rest of the day, he carried it there like armor. Word kept spreading. By the end of the week, the store manager called Jonah into his office. Jonah swallowed hard, nervous by default, unsure if this sudden attention had somehow violated a policy. But when he walked in, Mr. Whitaker, the same man who had once told Jonah to keep the lines moving, no dead air, stood up and extended a hand. "Jonah," he said, clearing his throat, "I owe you an apology." Jonah blinked, stunned. "I've always emphasized speed," Mr. Whitaker continued, "efficiency. But I failed to remember the human part of service. And watching how people have responded to you this week, how you handled that woman, gracefully, with patience, I've realized something. You're not just good at your job. You're the kind of person we should be learning from." Jonah's heart raced. He didn't know what to say. "We'd like to feature you in the store's employee spotlight," the manager added, "and we're going to start a new campaign. Voices of Meadow Ridge. Short videos, interviews, stories of our team. Would you be willing to share yours?" Jonah swallowed. "Yes," he said. For the first time, the stutter felt like a beginning, not a barrier. And it was. Because what started as a single moment between a shamed clerk and a brave little boy became something far bigger. The store's social media post about Jonah's story hit over 100,000 views in a week. Comments poured in from strangers across the country, teachers, parents, speech therapists, former stutterers, and people still struggling to be heard. This made me cry. My daughter hides in the bathroom when she has to read aloud in class. Jonah's story is going to help her. I stuttered badly until college. I wish I'd had someone like Max in my corner. More people need to listen the way Jonah listens. Quiet doesn't mean less. And then something unexpected happened. Max and Jonah were invited to speak at the local elementary school's Kindness Week assembly. Jonah almost said no, but when Max called the store personally, his voice tiny and excited, Jonah couldn't bring himself to refuse. "Will you come?" Max asked. "I'll talk first so you don't have to talk a lot. You can just be there." Jonah said yes. And that moment, standing in front of 300 children in a school gym that smelled like floor wax and juice boxes, became the next turning point. Not because Jonah gave a perfect speech, but because he gave an honest one, because he stood there holding a mic with shaking hands and said slowly, "I stutter, and that's okay. I'm still me." And the room applauded, not politely, not out of pity, but because every child in that room knew what it felt like to be afraid to speak, and because one brave little boy had taught them that silence didn't mean smallness. Afterward, Max hugged Jonah's leg like he was made of magic, and Jonah, for the first time in a long time, believed it. The days that followed the school assembly were different. Jonah still worked lane 6, still wore his brown vest, still greeted every customer with the same soft smile. But now, people saw him, not just as the cashier with the stutter, but as Jonah, the one the kids had cheered for, the one who had stood at that microphone and spoken anyway. There were quiet changes first. More customers waited patiently. More eyes met his with gentleness. More children smiled up at him, tugging at their parents' sleeves and whispering, "That's him." One afternoon, a little girl placed a drawing on the conveyor belt before her groceries, a picture of Jonah drawn in crayon, standing behind the register with a big red heart next to his head. "This is for your locker," she said. "My brother talks like you. I told him he's a hero too." Jonah had to take a moment before responding. The lump in his throat wasn't fear this time. It was something else, something deeper, something that came from being seen and celebrated without having to change a thing. Later that week, Mr. Whitaker called a staff meeting in the break room. Everyone expected another policy update, or maybe an announcement about hours for the upcoming holiday rush. But instead, he stood in front of the microwave with a projector behind him and said, "We're changing how we train new hires." He clicked a slide. On it, a photo of Jonah at the school assembly, standing beside Max, both of them smiling like they'd just cracked the code to the world. "This," Mr. Whitaker said, "is what we're going to lead with now. Kindness, patience, inclusion. From now on, every new employee will be trained in how we treat each other, not just how fast we scan groceries. And it starts with honoring every voice, no matter how it sounds." The room clapped. Some employees wiped away tears. Jonah sat in the back, stunned. And then, as if that weren't enough, something even more unexpected happened. Max's mom reached out with a proposal, a joint community night between Meadow Ridge Grocery and the local elementary school. An event to raise awareness for speech and communication differences and to celebrate listening, empathy, and everyday bravery. Jonah wasn't sure he could handle it. He liked his quiet corner, his lane, his routine. But when Max came in the next day holding a homemade flyer and bouncing on his toes, Jonah knew he couldn't say no. "We're calling it Hear Me Day," Max said proudly. "There'll be games and snacks and a place where people can share stories if they want, but only if they want." Jonah smiled. I'll be there." On the night of the event, the store was transformed. The produce section had been cleared to make space for chairs and tables. The bakery donated cookies and punch. Local students made posters with quotes like, "Every voice matters," and "We don't talk over courage." There was a mural wall where kids could draw or write messages to people who helped them feel heard. At the center of it all was a small stage, barely a foot off the ground, with a single microphone and a sign that read, "Say something if you'd like." One by one, people stepped forward. A teenager with a lisp read a poem he wrote about his dog. An elderly woman talked about how she'd hidden her stutter her whole life, until now. A father spoke softly about his nonverbal son who told stories with his eyes. And then Jonah stepped up. He didn't prepare anything. He didn't need to. He just stood, took a breath, and said, "I used to be afraid, not of talking, but of people not waiting, of them looking away." He paused. Max stood in the front row clutching his dinosaur, nodding solemnly. "But now I know," Jonah continued, "that the right people, they'll stay. They'll listen. And that's all I ever wanted." The room was silent. Then someone clapped, then another, and then the entire crowd stood. Not because he'd spoken perfectly, but because he'd spoken honestly, because he'd said what they all needed to hear. After that night, the mural wall stayed up. People added to it for weeks, quotes, drawings, notes of thanks. Jonah's favorite was a paper heart, colored in orange marker, that read, "Thank you for not giving up. Now I won't either." At the end of the month, Jonah was offered a new role, community liaison. A fancy title, but really, it meant he'd help train new staff, coordinate community nights, and continue being the heartbeat of the store. He still worked Lane 6 most days, still greeted customers, still stumbled on his words sometimes, but no one rolled their eyes, no one sighed. No one asked him to hurry, and instead they waited. And when he said, "Thank you," they smiled back and said, "You're welcome, Jonah." Because now they knew his name. Because now they remembered. Because one little boy spoke up, and the world got quieter. So Jonah could be heard. Jonah's new role slowly redefined what the grocery store meant to the community. What had once been just a place to buy milk and eggs became something gentler, more intentional. Families who'd never spoken to one another before and now greeted each other in line. Customers stayed a few extra minutes after checkout just to say hello. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves asking to go through Lane 6, even when another lane was open. Jonah had become, without trying to, a kind of anchor, not because he said the most or moved the fastest, but because he made people feel something rare in a busy world, acknowledged. The store's front window, once used for advertising sales on cereal and cleaning supplies, now held a rotating series of portraits. The Faces of Meadow Ridge, they were called. Each month, a new employee was featured: stockers, cashiers, janitors, bakers, with a short write-up next to their photo, written in their own words. Jonah's portrait was the first. They had taken it on a quiet Tuesday morning, him in his brown vest, standing near the card aisle, Jonah smiling soft and steady. Next to it he'd written, "I stutter, but I also remember your dog's name, and which bag of flour you like best. I will always try my best, even if the words take longer. Thank you for waiting." The day it went up, the manager said they'd never had so many customers stop and take photos in front of the window. One woman left a sticky note on the glass that simply said, "You made me cry in the best way." Word of Jonah's story continued to spread. Local newspapers ran features. The school where he and Max had spoken invited him back to talk to fifth graders during Inclusion Week. Parents asked if they could bring their children to meet him. Jonah was invited to attend a regional employee recognition luncheon downtown. Mr. Whitaker drove him, adjusting his tie nervously the whole way and insisting he hadn't worn a real suit in 20 years. At the event, Jonah sat quietly at table 7. He didn't speak unless spoken to, kept his napkin folded in his lap, and glanced often at the door. Crowds still made him nervous. But when it was his turn to go on stage and accept the award for Community Impact Through Service, he walked up slowly, heart thudding, and faced the microphone. "Thank you," he said, the stutter gentle but firm, for listening. That's all I ever needed." He didn't need to say more. The applause said the rest. Later that week, Jonah returned to work to find something taped to his locker, a drawing from a young boy who came in every Tuesday with his dad. The paper showed 2 stick figures at a register, one with a name tag that read Jonah, and a speech bubble that said, "I believe in what you." The son in the corner of the paper wore sunglasses and had a speech bubble of its own. "He's the best." Jonah smiled, folded the paper, and added it to the growing collection inside the pocket of his locker door. He kept every note, every drawing, every card. They were reminders of what he'd come through, of the little boy in the red raincoat who had once said what Jonah hadn't known how to say for himself, of the moment the world tilted just slightly toward kindness. On his day off that weekend, Jonah took the bus across town to visit his mother. She still lived in the same apartment, her arthritis managed with warm compresses and low-sodium meals. She refused to let anyone else cook. She opened the door and wrapped him in a hug. "You look good," she said. "You always smile like your father when something's going right." They had tea on the small balcony, and Jonah told her about the school visits, the community night, the award. She listened, eyes misty, hands cupped around her mug. "I used to worry you'd go through the world without being seen," she said. "Not because you weren't remarkable, but because the world doesn't always wait." He nodded. "But now," she continued, her voice cracking, "the world waits, because you made it." He reached across the table and held her hand. When he left, she slipped something into his coat pocket. Later, on the bus ride home, he unfolded it. It was a photo of him as a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, standing in the kitchen, holding up a picture book and trying to sound out the words. His mother had written on the back, "You've always been brave, the world's just finally catching up." He kept the photo in his wallet, not for pride, for strength, so that on the hard days, the days when the words still got caught, when the looks still stung, he could remember how far he'd come, and more importantly, how many people he now carried with him. Because kindness has gravity. Because once it begins, it pulls others in. Because one small voice, speaking truth in a crowded line, had reminded a room full of grown-ups how to be human. And Jonah, quiet, steady, patient Jonah, never forgot. Spring arrived in Meadow Ridge with a slow stretch of warmth, the kind that turned the sidewalk salt to powder and coaxed flower beds into color again. Outside the grocery store, the first planter boxes of the season were installed, bright tulips nodding in the breeze. Inside, a new display of sidewalk chalk and jump ropes had been set up near the entrance. And at Lane 6, Jonah stood as always, scanning items with quiet care, his gentle smile unchanged. He had just finished ringing up a woman's groceries, her toddler chewing on a string cheese, and her cart wobbling under bulk paper towels. When she paused before leaving and said, "Thank you for making this my favorite lane. It's peaceful here." Jonah blinked, then smiled again. Thank you," he replied. She gave a small nod, like she'd meant to say more, but didn't know how. Then she left, and the next customer stepped forward. There was always something steady about Jonah, something anchored. The store had changed a dozen ways. New managers, updated uniforms, a self-checkout system installed in the back, but Jonah remained, not untouched by the world, but unshaken in the face of it, and every week more people started to understand why. One afternoon, a boy named Elias came through his line. He was 9, thin, and wore headphones around his neck like armor. He stood a little too close to the cart and didn't speak. Jonah smiled gently, then glanced at the boy's mother, who gave a quick nod. Jonah scanned their groceries slowly, watching the boy's fingers twitch against the handlebar. "Would you like to help bag?" Jonah asked him softly. The boy looked up. His eyes widened slightly. Then he nodded. Together they packed the items, Jonah placing, the boy arranging. The rhythm between them was unspoken, but perfect. When they were done, Elias looked at Jonah and said barely above a whisper, "You talk like me." Jonah felt something hitch in his chest. "I do," he said. Elias's mother wiped at her eyes discreetly. "He never talks to strangers," she murmured. "Thank you." After they left, Jonah wrote the boy's name on a sticky note and placed it in his vest pocket. He wanted to remember, to carry the connection with him. Over the next few weeks, others came forward, customers and co-workers alike, sharing their own stories of speech, of struggle, of moments they had felt invisible. The Voices of Meadow Ridge campaign began adding video interviews to their weekly features, and Jonah, reluctantly at first, agreed to be filmed for one. They recorded him in the early morning, the store still quiet, Lane 6 spotless behind him. He wore his vest. He held his hands together in his lap. "My name is Jonah," he said into the camera. "I work here. I says, scan groceries. I says, say hello. And sometimes I says, say things slowly." He paused, breathing in through his nose. "But I'm not stuck. I'm just getting there my way." The video was posted on the store's website, then shared on social media. It went viral, again. Only this time, not because of a confrontation or a dramatic moment, but because of its softness, its steadiness. One of the comments read, "I didn't cry until he said, 'my way,' because I've never heard it explained that beautifully." Jonah's co-workers started sharing more openly about themselves. Corey, the bagger, admitted he used to be scared of messing up small talk. The new assistant manager, Marcy, talked about growing up with selective mutism and how watching Jonah had helped her feel less alone. The culture of the store shifted, without memos, without mandates, just presence. And then Max came back. He was older now, 10, almost 11. With longer hair and a new dinosaur plush tucked under his arm, he ran up to Lane 6 where Jonah had just finished helping an elderly man with his change. "Guess what?" Max announced, holding up a flyer. "I'm giving a speech next week at school for the Respect Rally, and I picked my topic. Want to know what it is?" Jonah leaned on the counter, smiling. Yeah." Max grinned wide. "It's called What I Learned from a Grocery Store Hero." Jonah's mouth fell open slightly. That's a big title," he said. Max shrugged. "You earned it." The day of the rally, Jonah sat in the third row of the school gym, squeezed between Max's parents and a local news anchor covering the event. The bleachers were packed with families, and the stage was decorated with glittery banners and hand-painted signs that read things like, "Every voice deserves volume." Max walked to the mic, adjusted the height, and began. "When I was little, I saw someone being treated badly because of how they talk. And I said something, but what I didn't realize back then was that the person I was defending didn't need saving. He was already strong. He was already kind. And even though people made fun of how he spoke, he never let that stop him from being the best part of everyone's day." He looked directly at Jonah. "His name is Jonah. He works at Meadow Ridge Grocery, and I hope when I grow up, I'm half as brave as he is every morning before the sun comes up." Jonah wept, quietly with his head low, but his hands never stopped clapping when Max finished. After the rally, a group of kids surrounded him, asking questions, offering hugs, handing him little paper stars they'd made during craft time. One girl with pigtails gave him a small notebook. "It's for your words," she said, "so they always have somewhere to go." He kept that notebook in his vest pocket, and in the weeks that followed, he began writing in it, a sentence a day, sometimes about the people he met, sometimes about how it felt to be seen. Once he wrote, "The words come slow, but they still arrive, and now people wait with the door open." He didn't need to say more. The world finally was listening. Summer arrived in Meadow Ridge like a gentle exhale, longer days, warmer evenings, and the soft chatter of sprinklers spinning across front lawns. At the grocery store, customers strolled in wearing sun hats and flip-flops. The seasonal aisle shifted to lemonade pitchers and charcoal briquettes, and Lane 6 was as steady as ever. Jonah stood at his register, greeting each shopper with his signature nod, his quiet smile, and the words that always came, sometimes slowly, sometimes halting, but always with heart. By now he knew almost every regular by name, Mrs. Delaney, who bought 2 bottles of sparkling water and a copy of Better Homes and Gardens every Tuesday. Andre, who came in with his teenage sons and always made a joke about the self-checkout being too robotic. And even newcomers had started seeking out Lane 6, not for speed but for calm. They came for Jonah's gentleness, for the steady way he asked, paper or plastic, without apology. One morning, just after Jonah had finished helping a woman carry a heavy bag of pet food to her trunk, he returned to find a small white envelope taped to his register screen. It simply said, "For Jonah," in looping cursive. Inside was a card and a note. "Jonah, you may not remember me, but a few weeks ago I was having the worst day I've had in years. I was short with you at the register, impatient. I remember you looked at me and said, 'I hope your day gets better,' and I brushed it off. But I want you to know, it did, because of you. That moment stayed with me. Thank you for being who you are. Please don't ever change the way you speak. It's more honest than most people know how to be." There was no name. But Jonah placed the card beside the drawing from Elias and the note from Max's mom, creating a growing little shrine in his locker, his wall of words. Proof that his voice, even when tangled, was reaching people in ways he never imagined. Later that week, Corey caught Jonah before closing time and said, "Hey, you remember how the school had you and Max come speak last year?" Jonah nodded. "Well, guess what? The district wants to do a video series now, Stories of Local Kindness. They want to start with you." Jonah hesitated. Corey grinned. "They'll film after hours. No crowd, just you. Me and Marcy can help." Jonah finally agreed. The interview took place in the produce section. Lights dimmed, the hum of the refrigeration units providing a soft background. The camera rolled as Jonah stood beside a pyramid of oranges and spoke slowly. "I used to think my voice was a problem," he said. But maybe it's a pause, a chance for someone else to listen." The video was posted on the school district's page and shared by families, teachers, even the mayor's office. A local poet created a piece inspired by Jonah's quote, "A pause is a place to listen," and performed it at a community festival. A bookstore put it on their front window. Jonah, as always, remained modest, still arrived 10 minutes early, still helped Corey restock gum displays and trained new hires with quiet patience. But more and more, people told him he'd help them see things differently. A man in a pressed suit and tired eyes told Jonah, "My daughter stutters. I didn't know how to talk to her about it. Now I do." A high schooler with earbuds and chipped nail polish leaned over the belt and whispered, "You're why I auditioned for the play. I have a lisp, but now I think I can do it anyway." Even the new assistant manager, a quiet woman named Rena, confided one evening, "My brother used to pretend to be sick every time he had to give a presentation. I wish he'd had someone like you growing up." Jonah never responded with long speeches. He never needed to. He just said, "Thank you." The store eventually installed a suggestion box labeled "Voices We Need More Of." People dropped in notes about staff members who made their day, stories about kindness witnessed in the aisles. Jonah's name appeared so frequently that Mr. Whitaker stopped reading them aloud individually. Instead, he created a bulletin board titled Jonah Moments. At the top was Max's original quote, written in bold. He didn't need saving. He was already brave. Jonah would walk past the board every shift, reading the scrawled thank yous and small drawings from children, and he began to believe what they said, not because he'd changed into someone new, but because he had stayed exactly who he was. One evening, as the sun set through the wide windows at the front of the store, painting the floor in amber light, Jonah saw Max again, a little taller now. No dinosaur this time, but a new notebook tucked under his arm. He ran up to Lane 6. "Hey, Jonah," he said, a little breathless. "Hey, Max," Jonah replied. "I wrote a poem," Max said. Want to hear it? Jonah nodded. Max pulled out the notebook and read, "Some people speak in waterfalls. Some people speak in thunder. But my friend Jonah speaks like footsteps. And you listen because you wonder." Jonah had no words. He simply reached out, placed a hand on Max's shoulder, and let the moment bloom between them. Max grinned. "That's okay. You don't have to say anything." But Jonah did, eventually, in his own time. And when he did, it was perfect. Autumn came to Meadow Ridge wrapped in gold and wind. The leaves in the grocery store parking lot gathered in quiet corners, dancing every time a cart rolled through them. Inside, the store shelves filled with cinnamon-scented candles, canned pumpkin, and the first boxes of holiday lights. It was a season of change, brisk mornings and early sunsets. But for Jonah, some things remained the same. He still walked to work with his headphones on and his mind calm. He still greeted each customer with a smile, his stutter woven gently into his voice like a melody unique to him. Lane 6 had become something of a landmark. Parents pointed it out to their children. Teenagers asked for selfies. Local teachers mentioned him in classroom discussions about courage and empathy. And yet Jonah remained exactly who he'd always been, quiet, observant, deliberate. He didn't seek attention, but he accepted it now with grace, not as praise but as proof that listening had power. One Friday afternoon, just after the after-school rush had passed, Jonah spotted a boy hesitating near the card aisle. He looked about 9 or 10, his hoodie too big and his eyes flicking from shelf to floor and back again. Jonah watched for a few moments, then gently stepped from behind his register and approached. You okay?" he asked softly. The boy turned slowly. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then nodded. But Jonah waited. "I came to talk to you," the boy whispered finally. Jonah tilted his head. "My name's Caleb. I saw your video at school, the one where you said your voice isn't stuck, it's just getting there your way." Jonah smiled. Caleb's hands were shaking slightly. "I stutter too, and it makes me feel broken." Jonah crouched slightly, lowering himself to the boy's eye level. "You're not," he said. You're just speaking in steps." Caleb blinked fast. "I don't like talking. It feels like everyone's waiting for me to mess up." Jonah reached into his vest and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was something he'd written the night after the school assembly with Max. Just a sentence, scrawled in his neat block handwriting. He handed it to Caleb. The boy unfolded it and read, "Even a mountain path is still a path." Caleb clutched the paper like it was made of gold. Thank you," he said, voice trembling. That moment stayed with Jonah for days. He thought about Caleb's face, his eyes, the way he'd said broken like it was a label someone else had handed him, and Jonah decided to do something he'd never done before. He wrote a letter to the editor. It took him 3 days to finish. He wrote it in his notebook during his lunch breaks, one careful line at a time. When it was done, he brought it to the local paper's office and handed it over in person. The receptionist blinked in surprise, but accepted it kindly. A week later, the letter ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. It read, "To anyone who thinks their voice is wrong. I want you to know that the speed of your words does not measure their worth. I stutter. I always have. I probably always will. But I have learned that silence doesn't mean smallness, that pause doesn't mean weakness, and that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that take their time. Your story is not less because it comes out slow. Speak your truth, your way. We'll wait." Jonah, Lane 6. The grocery store sold out of newspapers that day. People came in clutching copies, asking for Jonah's autograph like he was a hometown author or a visiting poet. One woman said through tears, "You wrote the words I've been trying to find for years." A teenager handed Jonah a folded note that said simply, "You helped me stop hating my voice." Mr. Whitaker ordered a plaque of the letter and hung it in the break room. Then a second one, which he mounted near the front doors beneath a banner that read, "Every voice welcome here." The mayor declared the last week of October Jonah Week, but Jonah, for all the praise, still started each day the same way. Quiet cup of tea, a short walk to the store, a breath before the doors opened. He still trained new hires, stocked gum, smiled at children, and asked, "Paper or plastic?" without rushing. And he still wrote in his notebook, one page every night, small thoughts, things he noticed, things that gave him hope. One entry read, "There is no wrong way to speak love into the world." Another, "I'm not a hero, I'm a mirror. I show people what they forgot they already were." And on a crisp November morning, Max visited again. Taller now, voice deeper, but still carrying his dinosaur, now weathered and worn, but whole. He handed Jonah a slip of paper. "College application essay," he said, sheepish. "We had to write about someone who changed the way we see the world." Jonah unfolded the page. It began, "There was a man who worked lane 6. He didn't speak fast, but he spoke true. And he taught me that bravery isn't loud. It's steady. He didn't need a stage. He needed a line of people willing to wait. And because of him, I know I want to build spaces that hold people, not just their purchases. I want to build a world that listens." Jonah folded the paper slowly and placed it in his notebook. He didn't say much. He didn't have to, because Max knew, and so did the city. And so now did the world, because once upon a time, a boy in a red raincoat stood up and made room for a voice that moved mountains in whispers. Winter settled over Meadow Ridge in a hush, laying thick snow on rooftops and frosting the grocery store windows with delicate lacework no one dared wipe away. Inside the store, garlands hung along the aisles. The smell of cinnamon brooms mingled with fresh pine, and the intercom played quiet instrumentals of holiday songs. Customers came bundled in scarves and coats, and Jonah, still in his brown vest and now with a knit hat someone's grandmother had made for him, greeted them all with the same soft warmth he always had. Lane 6 was decorated this year. Corey had hung little paper stars above the register, each one bearing a word submitted by customers in Jonah's honor. Patience, strength, kind, brave. One child wrote Super Voice in orange crayon. Marcy added a snow globe with a miniature grocery store inside it. Every time someone shook it, glitter swirled around a tiny red dinosaur perched by the entrance. Jonah didn't ask for any of it, but he kept the globe beside the till and smiled every time it was touched. One day, as flurries blew outside and the store hummed with holiday energy, a woman Jonah didn't recognize stepped into his lane. She had a familiar quietness about her, the kind Jonah had learned to recognize, the kind that looked like someone carrying 1,000 invisible things. She placed a few items on the belt: milk, pasta, a box of crayons. When she reached for her wallet, her hand trembled. She said nothing, but Jonah saw the worry flicker behind her eyes. He scanned everything, then looked at her and said, "I can hold this if you need to come back." The woman blinked at him, slowly nodded. She pressed her hands into her coat pockets, paused, then whispered, "Thank you." He offered a small nod and turned to organize the items. She left quietly, disappearing into the cold. 5 minutes later, another customer, an older man with a gentle face, stepped forward, saw the paused items, and asked, "Did she forget her wallet?" Jonah hesitated, then nodded once. "Add it to mine," the man said. Jonah's eyes widened. "She looked like she needed a win today," the man added. "Someone did that for me once, long time ago." Jonah finished the transaction and left the bag behind the counter, quietly tucking a small note inside. "You are not alone. Happy holidays. From Lane 6." The next day the woman returned. Her eyes were red, her coat dusted with snow. She held a crumpled napkin in her hand and unfolded it like a map. "I didn't know who to thank," she said softly. "But then I saw your video last night. I saw the snow globe in the corner, and I just knew it was you." Jonah swallowed, then reached for a sticker, one of the gold ones they gave to kids, and handed it to her. The woman took it in both hands, pressed it to her heart. "My son's nonverbal," she said. "I've been so scared. But seeing the way people wait for you, listen to you, it reminded me that the world can change." Jonah didn't speak. He stepped out from behind the counter and, for the first time, opened his notebook in public. He flipped to the page he'd written the night before. It read, "Someone will always understand, even if they don't say so. Keep walking toward that someone." She read it, cried again, this time without apology. From that moment on, the notebook took on a new role. Jonah left it open at Lane 6 when he worked, just beside the scanner. People began adding to it, quotes, doodles, memories. Pages turned into a collection of voices, each one a quiet act of belonging. One customer drew a tree and wrote, "This is Jonah's kindness. We've all found shade here." A child scribbled, "I don't talk fast either, but I'm good at hugs." And on Christmas Eve, Max returned once more, this time wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and holding a small, wrapped box. "I wanted you to have this," he said, handing it over. Jonah opened it carefully. Inside was a custom-made pin, a small mountain trail with words etched along the edge. "Still speaking, still strong." Jonah pinned it to his vest beside his name tag. That night, after closing, the staff gathered for a small end-of-year meal in the break room. There were cookies on mismatched plates, paper crowns from cracker poppers, and music played low through a speaker balanced on a milk crate. Mr. Whitaker stood up, clearing his throat. "I used to think this store ran on numbers," he said. "Inventory, foot traffic, receipts. But this year, I learned we run on people, on presence. And a lot of that started with Jonah." He raised his paper cup. "To Lane 6, and the voice that taught us how to wait." Everyone cheered. Not loudly, but enough. Jonah felt the warmth of it down to his shoes. And when he walked home that night, through the snow and past the lights glowing in windows, he paused beneath the store's front sign, the one that had quietly changed over the past year. It now read, "Meadow Grocery, home of Lane 6, where every voice matters." Jonah smiled, the snow falling gently into his hair, his notebook tucked beneath his arm. Then he walked on, steady and whole, his steps like words not rushed, but always arriving, one after the other, true and certain, and the world kept listening. The new year rolled in with a hush of snow and the slow blink of string lights still clinging to porches. Meadow Ridge returned to its usual rhythm, but something in the town felt subtly altered, kinder, softer around the edges. It wasn't just the weather or the turn of the calendar, it was the way people had started looking at each other a little longer, listening more carefully. And at the center of that quiet shift, whether he wanted to be or not, was Jonah. By now he couldn't go a day without someone asking for Lane 6 specifically, not for speed but for familiarity, for the peace of being seen without being hurried. Children recognized him, teachers referenced him, speech therapists brought in clients just to observe the grace with which he moved through each conversation. But Jonah didn't let the attention change him. He still arrived 10 minutes early, still stacked the gum at eye level for kids, still paused gently between every word. One Wednesday morning, as he stood behind the register flipping through his notebook during a slow hour, he noticed a new face walking toward him. A boy, maybe 12, tall for his age, with large hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. His mother followed a few steps behind, pushing a half-full cart and scanning her list. The boy stepped forward, then stopped, hovered. Jonah waited. Finally, the boy looked up, eyes wide and anxious. Are you Are you the guy from the notebook?" Jonah blinked, then nodded. Yeah. The boy exhaled, like he'd been holding it for days. "My name's Isaiah. I can't talk good, and I got in a fight at school 'cause someone said I sounded stupid." His voice cracked. He clutched the edge of the counter like it might keep him from floating away. Jonah didn't say anything right away. He just reached slowly into his vest, pulled out his notebook, flipped it to a blank page, and slid it across the counter with a pen. Isaiah looked at it, then at Jonah, then down, and he wrote, "I don't know what to do." Jonah nodded, turned the page, and wrote underneath, "You don't have to know yet, but you're already doing something brave." The boy smiled. Not a big smile, just the smallest turn at the corner of his mouth, but it was real. From that day forward, Jonah began something new. He set out a small box beside the register labeled "Say Something." Inside were index cards and pens. People could write whatever they wanted, confessions, thoughts, hopes, questions. Jonah didn't read them all, but he responded to many. Slowly, carefully. His replies, slipped into the same box a day or two later, were never signed. But people knew. A note from a woman going through divorce. "I don't think I know how to be alone." The response, "Being alone isn't the same as being lost. You're still here, still walking." A card from a teenage boy. "I want to sing, but my voice cracks." Response, "Cracks make echoes. That's how sound travels." The Say Something box filled every day. Soon, a second was added, then a third. Someone from the local library caught wind of it and offered to display the most moving exchanges in a community exhibit. They called it the Echo Wall. People came from towns away to read the pinned cards, to hear a voice that stumbled but never stopped. And still, Jonah remained grounded. On weekends, he volunteered with a new speech inclusion group at the community center, sitting with children as they practiced saying their names out loud. On weeknights, he helped Max draft plans for their next school visit. On early mornings, he walked through the store before it opened, touching each register like a quiet ritual, whispering to the air, "Let today be kind." Then one day, without warning, Jonah's photo appeared in a national article. The title read, "The Cashier Who Changed a Town by Taking His Time." The article didn't glamorize him. It simply told the truth. Of the boy who once felt like a mistake. Of the moment a child spoke up. Of the man who kept showing up until the world slowed down to meet him. Letters flooded the store, emails from people across the country, teachers asking to use the article in class. Parents sending pictures of their children holding up homemade signs that said, "My voice matters." A teacher from Oregon wrote, "We started a Jonah journal in our classroom. Kids write in it when they feel like they aren't being heard. We read it together once a week. They've never been this open." Jonah read every message he could. He cried sometimes quietly, in the break room or on the walk home, heart too full to hold it all. One afternoon, Mr. Whitaker pulled him aside. "I know you don't like the spotlight," he said, "but there's something I think you should see." He handed Jonah a brochure. It was for a national speaking event, Voices That Carry, a conference for speech empowerment and storytelling. "You don't have to say anything," the manager added. "Just think about it." Jonah held the paper all the way home. That night he wrote in his notebook, "What if I speak not to be perfect, but to let someone else breathe easier?" A week later he said yes, not because he wanted to be famous, not because he craved a stage, but because he knew somewhere out there another child was holding their voice like a secret too heavy to carry alone. And Jonah, he knew how to make space. He knew how to wait. He knew how to listen. The day Jonah stood on a stage in Chicago beneath a banner that read, "Voices That Carry," the auditorium was packed. Not with CEOs or celebrities, but with speech pathologists, teachers, parents, students, and people who knew exactly what it meant to fight for every word. The room hummed with anticipation, not the impatient kind, but the kind that waits with breath held gently, reverently. Jonah stood backstage, hands folded over the notebook he'd brought with him all the way from Meadow Ridge. Max stood beside him, taller now, a high school senior with broad shoulders and a calm presence. He gave Jonah a small nod. "You got this." Jonah nodded back. "I know." He took the stage slowly. No music, no big introduction, just the quiet creak of his shoes on polished wood, and the gentle hush of a crowd that had already decided to hear him. He stepped up to the microphone, opened his notebook, and began. "My name is Jonah. I work at a grocery store in a small town. I check out apples, milk, cereal, but I also try to check in with people." The room leaned in. "I stutter. That's not a surprise. You can hear it. It's not a secret, but for a long time it felt like one." He turned a page. "I used to think I had to hide my voice, that the world didn't want to wait. But then a little boy did. He waited, and he spoke up. And in that moment, something shifted." Jonah looked out over the crowd. "Now, every day I speak because I can, not because it's easy, but because there's someone else in the room who thinks they're broken, and I want them to know they're not." He paused. "You're not." There were tears in the audience, heads nodding, hands covering mouths. Jonah stepped back. He didn't finish with a flourish. He finished with a breath. And the room stood together without hesitation. He stepped off stage to an embrace from Max and a dozen handshakes from people who saw themselves in him. Later that evening, at the conference's quiet reception, a girl no older than 10 approached him with a program booklet in her hands. She pointed to the spot where his name was listed and said, "I put a star here so I wouldn't forget who you are." Jonah smiled, knelt beside her, and offered her a gold sticker from his pocket. "For you," he said. Back in Meadow Ridge, they held a welcome home party for him. The store was decorated with blue streamers, and a banner read, "Our Jonah, our voice." Corey made cupcakes. Marcy brought punch. The break room walls were lined with messages from customers. One read, "You made it easier to speak at my interview." Another, "My child asks to practice reading out loud at dinner now." Jonah didn't give a speech at the party. He just hugged the people who'd waited, shook hands with the ones who stayed, and later, after everyone had gone home, he sat in lane 6, long after closing, watching the lights flicker off one by one. He opened his notebook, wrote a single line. There is no such thing as a weak voice, only voices waiting to be heard. That winter, Meadow Ridge started a new program with the library, Talk Time, where kids and adults with speech differences could meet every Saturday. No speeches, no pressure, just space, just room. And Jonah, of course, was there every week, quietly passing out cookies, sitting cross-legged on the floor with kids who'd never said their names out loud before. One boy, 7, with shaking hands and a whisper of a voice, tugged at Jonah's sleeve after his first session. "Does it ever get easier?" he asked. Jonah looked down, smiled gently. I don't know," he said, but we get stronger." And the boy nodded like that was enough, like that was everything. Because it was, because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands behind a grocery counter. Sometimes it folds groceries with care. Sometimes it writes slowly, carefully, in a notebook that carries more than ink. And sometimes it stutters, but it never stops, and it always reaches someone. Spring returned to Meadow Ridge like a whispered promise. Quiet rains rinsing the salt from the sidewalks, tiny buds breaking through frozen soil, and daylight lingering just a little longer each night. At the grocery store, The front windows were scrubbed clean, the floral displays brought out again, and Lane 6 still buzzed with its familiar rhythm: beep, bag, smile. And Jonah, as always, stood steady in the middle of it all. He was different now, not in how he spoke, but in how he was heard. Not in the sound of his voice, but in the space it held. The notebook on his counter remained, now weathered and full, its corners curled and ink smudged from countless hands. A second notebook had been added, then a third. Eventually, the store installed a custom stand to house them, the listening shelf, they called it. People still left notes, still read Jonah's thoughts, still paused at his lane, not just for groceries, but for grounding. One Thursday, just as the sun broke through a week of rain, Jonah received a letter addressed to the store. The return address was out of state, somewhere in Texas. Inside was a simple card and a photo. The card read, "Dear Jonah, my son Caleb met you a year ago. He was afraid to speak in class, refused to go to school on presentation days, and barely spoke above a whisper. He saw your story online. Then we drove to Meadow Ridge while visiting family just to meet you. You gave him a note that said, 'Even a mountain path is still a path.' He carries it in his backpack. Still. Last week he gave a full book report in front of his class. He stuttered the whole way through, and at the end, they gave him a standing ovation. I just wanted you to see what you helped build. Thank you for giving him, and all of us, permission to go slow." The photo was of a classroom, rows of desks, bright bulletin boards, and a boy in a yellow shirt standing at the front, holding a chapter book with both hands. He was mid-sentence, mid-word, mid-courage. Jonah placed the card gently into his growing collection. That evening, he added a new page to his notebook. When you speak, it ripples, even if you never hear the echo. Around that time, the store partnered with the local school district to launch a new initiative, Speak Kind, a campaign designed to normalize communication differences in public spaces. They printed posters, held assemblies, trained customer service workers, and at the heart of it all stood Jonah, quiet, consistent, a voice of calm in a world still learning how to wait. One day, while helping a man carry groceries to his car, Jonah overheard a mother in the next lane telling her daughter, "It's okay if your words take time. Remember what Jonah says. You're still on the path." Jonah didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The words were no longer just his. At home, Jonah had started writing longer pieces in a fresh journal, not just notes, but reflections. He didn't call it a book, but it was growing into one. Pages and pages of moments, people, lessons. He shared excerpts on a new community blog. One post read, "I used to believe silence made me invisible, but now I see silence is not absence. It is the place where listening begins." The blog quietly went viral. Readers began submitting their own stories. A college student with a stutter who had been afraid to speak up in class. A grandfather who had never sung to his grandchildren until he read Jonah's words. A woman who hadn't spoken aloud in a meeting for 10 years and did so the day after reading Jonah's reflection. Courage sounds like whatever comes next. And still, Jonah showed up to Lane 6 every day. Still helped bag groceries, still thanked people slowly, still offered stickers to children and nods to the familiar faces who returned, week after week, just to stand in his presence a little longer. One quiet Sunday, a girl named Ava stood in line with her father. She clutched a copy of The Little Prince and wore a paperclip bracelet around her wrist. When it was their turn, she looked up and said, "I practiced how to say your name." Jonah smiled. "Why?" "Because I wanted to get it right," she said, beaming, "like how you always wait for us." Her father mouthed, "Thank you," behind her. Jonah gave her a gold star sticker and wrote a note in the margin of his notebook that day. Every time someone remembers to wait, the world gets softer. By summer, Jonah had become more than a local figure. He was being studied in communications programs, quoted in articles, invited to lead workshops, not just about speech, but about the ethics of listening. He declined most speaking engagements, but always replied to letters, always showed up for the people who came into his store. Lane 6 had become a landmark, a sanctuary. One morning, a new employee named Cassie, nervous and jittery on her first shift, asked if she could shadow Jonah. "I've got anxiety," she confessed, "and I talk too fast when I panic." Jonah handed her a slip of paper that read, "You don't have to be fast to be steady." She shadowed him for 3 days. By the 4th, she asked if she could stay at Lane 6 permanently. By the end of the year, Jonah's notebooks were bound and printed, distributed to schools and libraries. The title, chosen by Max, was Still Speaking. Jonah didn't hold a launch party. He just wrote another page. Because for him, the story wasn't done. Because someone else still needed the next word. Because somewhere, another child was stalling in a classroom. Somewhere a customer was dreading asking for help. Somewhere a person was swallowing their voice for fear of being too slow, too much, too different. And Jonah, he'd already made space. They just had to step into it. He would be there, steady, listening, still speaking. In early autumn, the Meadow Ridge Public Library hosted an event they called Voices That Wait. It wasn't flashy. No balloons, no banners, no podiums, just a circle of chairs in the main reading room, a table of apple cider and pumpkin bread, and one open notebook in the middle of the floor. It was Jonah's idea, a gathering for people to share, or sit quietly, or listen without pressure. No icebreakers, no expectations, just space. The flyer simply said, "For anyone who's been told they take too long, come exactly as you are." People showed up, a dozen at first, then 20. Parents with children on the autism spectrum, teenagers in oversized sweaters who rarely spoke in class, a man who used a speech device, a woman who had spent most of her life selectively mute. Some spoke, some didn't, but all stayed. Jonah sat with them, not as a facilitator, but as a participant. Just another voice among many. That night, someone wrote on the first page of the new communal journal, "We are not quiet because we have nothing to say. We are quiet because we're learning how to say it in a world that's just now learning how to hear." Jonah traced the words with his finger, then added beneath it, "The world doesn't get quieter to help us fit in. It gets quieter so it can fit us." Back at the store, Lane 6 now had a plaque, just a small one, mounted to the side of the register. "This is where we wait. This is where we listen." No one asked for it. It had just appeared. Corey claimed it wasn't his doing, but his smile betrayed him. New customers asked about it often, and every time Jonah explained the same way, with patience, with a soft cadence, and with the knowledge that his words, once doubted, now shaped how others spoke to themselves. He trained a new staff member named Luis, a quiet 19-year-old who wore headphones on his breaks and rarely made eye contact. On his first day, Luis apologized when his hand trembled while scanning. "I get nervous," he said, "and my voice goes away." Jonah passed him a note. "Your voice doesn't go away. It's just waiting for a place to land." Luis kept it in his wallet. Max, now in college but home for break, stopped by one afternoon. He walked straight to Lane 6, leaned across the counter and said, "Guess what?" Jonah raised his brows. "I changed my major." Jonah blinked. To what?" "Speech-language pathology," Max grinned. "I want to help other kids find their voice, like you helped me." Jonah's throat tightened. Max reached into his backpack and pulled out a small pin, just like the one he'd given Jonah years before, a mountain trail. This time the words etched on the edge were different. "Because of you, I speak." Jonah pinned it beside the original one, a quiet symmetry. Winter neared again, and with it came colder mornings and longer nights. The store grew busier, holiday music played softly. People rushed more, but not at Lane 6. There, things still moved at the same steady beat. One afternoon, a child named Nia, a second grader with a stutter and a firecracker heart, stood in Jonah's line holding a piece of folded construction paper. "This is for you," she said. Inside was a drawing, a large ear, a heart inside it, and words that read, "You help us talk softer to ourselves." Jonah closed his eyes. That night he opened his notebook again, wrote slowly. Maybe I was never meant to speak loudly. Maybe I was meant to speak deeply. The following week, an email arrived. It was from a school district in another state. They were launching a new training series for teachers and staff on inclusive communication. They wanted to name it after him. The Jonah Framework, Listening Beyond Volume. He said yes. Not because he wanted recognition, but because if a single teacher read his story before speaking to a child who stutters, that child's life could change. Because sometimes a name isn't a spotlight. It's a bridge. Years later, people would write about Lane 6, not as a counter or a place where groceries were bagged, but as a movement, a reminder, a moment in time when a town adjusted its rhythm to honor one man's pace. But Jonah never thought of it like that. He thought of the faces, of the pauses, of the notes passed quietly across the scanner. He thought of the boy in the red raincoat, the first spark of courage that lit the way. And every morning he still arrived early, still dusted the counter, still wrote in his notebook, still spoke slowly, carefully, and always from somewhere true. Because there is no such thing as a small voice. Only voices we've waited too long to hear. And Jonah? He was still speaking. In the early days of March, when the air smelled faintly of thawing soil and wet pavement, Meadow Ridge Grocery unveiled a small corner bookshelf near the customer service desk. It wasn't stocked with recipes or coupon leaflets. Instead, it held a dozen copies of Jonah's bound notebooks, worn, well-loved volumes of his daily thoughts, reflections, and quiet truths. The display was simple, topped with a handwritten sign that read, "Take one, return it when you're ready, or keep it if it speaks to you." They called it the Listening Library. People did take them. One customer cried quietly in aisle 4 while reading page 27, "You don't have to be fast to be seen. You just have to be real." Another woman brought it to the checkout and said to Jonah, This is what my son needed. I didn't know how to reach him, but now I think I do." He nodded, not because he knew the answers, but because he understood the question. In a town full of people who had learned to rush, Jonah had taught them how to arrive. The store began getting letters from other grocery chains across the country asking how they could start their own listening libraries. One in Vermont launched Pause Pages. A shop in Kansas created Cart Conversations, where customers could leave notes of encouragement for staff. Jonah's name came up often in those conversations, not just as a cashier, but as a catalyst. Still, he stayed grounded. He worked the same shifts, wore the same vest, walked the same path to and from the store, snow or sun. His co-workers often joked that he could probably run for mayor, but Jonah would only smile and shake his head. I'm fine right here." One day, a letter arrived with a wax seal and elegant handwriting. It was from a woman named Clarice, a speech-language pathologist from the other side of the country. She wrote, "Dear Jonah, I used to tell my clients to work toward fluency, to aim for control, but after I read your journal, I changed. Now I tell them, aim for truth, for presence, for peace. Thank you for redefining fluency, not as the absence of stutter, but the presence of courage." Jonah folded the letter gently and placed it in the very first notebook he ever filled, the one Max had once read from so many years ago. By the end of the month, Jonah's story was taught in classrooms. Public speaking courses assigned still speaking as required reading. A college debate team began opening their practice rounds with a moment of silence, for anyone in the room who needed extra time to begin. Jonah heard about all of this secondhand. He still never searched his name online. He just kept living the story. One morning, as the sky opened into a soft blush over Meadow Ridge, Jonah arrived at the store to find something new. A little plaque installed above the automatic doors. Just 3 lines. "Come as you are, speak as you do. We will wait." Mr. Whitaker greeted him inside with a grin. "You okay with it?" Jonah stared at the words a long time, then said, Yes, it feels like home." That evening, as he locked up his register, swept the floor around Lane 6, and tucked his latest journal back into his locker, Jonah paused. He pulled out one of the blank customer notebooks and opened to the first page. He wrote, "Whoever you are, if you're reading this, I hope you know, your voice does not need fixing. It needs freedom. Say it slow. Say it twice. Say it sideways if you must. Just don't stop. I'll be listening." He left the page open on the counter, and in the morning it was gone, taken by someone who needed it, passed forward like every good truth is meant to be, because kindness echoes, because courage is quiet, because every day Jonah still speaks, and the world finally speaks back.